Right. Good morning, everyone. This is a recording of my session SSRS Inception, reporting on reporting services. Okay, let's get started. Excuse me. So why are you here? So essentially what I'm thinking most of you who'll be watching this are that you're BI developers or you're DBAs and you're looking to get an understanding of what's going on in your report server environment. So how I came to be where I am to be doing this session was essentially I started working for a company a few years ago. In the first few days I got to grips with their report environment, and it was massive. There were just hundreds of reports. I had absolutely no idea who was using what it was being used for, whether or not it was being used at all. It was just a headache, and I really needed some way that I could start picking apart what was going on with it and what stuff was on there that wasn't being used anymore, so I could get rid of it really. And so that really came about. That's what prompted this session. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to cover why we might want to monitor SSRS, what metrics we can actually capture in SSRS, an overview of the SSRS architecture, because there are some pitfalls and things that you need to be aware of if you're going to start looking at this, and a couple of methods that we can use to monitor SSRS. Now, we're going to look at 3 methods. I mean, there are many more. There are paid-for tools as well that do the same thing. If you don't want to go away and do the work yourself, that's it's up to you. So method 1 is a simple way. Method 2 is a slightly more advanced version of method 1, and method 3 is my own version, which is an automated way to analyze what's going on in SSRS. Okay, please hold for the Microsoft warning. So Microsoft really don't want you doing anything to SSRS that doesn't go through the report manager. So you shouldn't be connecting to the report server database, and you shouldn't be playing with the stuff, according to Microsoft. But it doesn't mean that we can't still do stuff with it. Doesn't mean that we can't maybe take a backup of our report server and analyze it that way, so we're not having any impact on our production report server. So Microsoft goes so far as to say that your SSRS environment should not be modified or tuned, and if you do that, you might introduce changes that will impair the report server operations, and that's scary stuff. I mean, if you work for a company who has a Microsoft support license and you go modifying the report server environment, it crashes, you try and ask for their help, they're probably not going to be able to help you. So you just need to be careful of what you're doing. And it says down here, all access to the report server database must be handled through the report server. Now, to some extent, I do agree with this. I have had problems before where I have restarted the report server and I've not used the report server configuration manager, and it has caused lots of problems. So for a lot of things, you really do need to use the report manager, but for some things, I just don't think you do. Okay. Right, so if anyone would like to play along, or after the session you want to go away and have a play and see how this looks on your own environment, please do. So there's a shortened link here. If you just go to Google, put that in, you'll get a link to my blog. There's a section on my blog which has all the stuff that I'm going to cover today, all split out into various little chunks that you can read through in your own time. Now, the reason there's this image and the reason this is called SSRS Inception is because whenever I think about reporting on reporting services, my brain starts to hurt. I start looking, you're looking inwards almost, and I get this image in my head from Inception. This is an infinity mirror, and it just goes on and on and on and on. It's very cool. I thought it sort of symbolized what I was thinking. Okay, so why might you want to monitor SSRS? So for me, I mean, I just needed to do all the things that we've already covered. I really need to know who was using my reports. Well, my report's being used by senior management. Will it being used by people even higher than that, by our sort of board of directors? I mean, are they being used by the guys on the ground? And how are these reports being used? I mean, are they being run once on the first of the month and then that's it? No one else is really interested after that? I mean, when a report, what I wanted to know is when the report is being used and when it's not being used. You know, when you have a report and you give it to a group of people, you know, are they using it? If it's something even for compliance, are they not using it? Does it come down to the fact that you've got two managers, one who's really good, one who's not so good? Is it because the one who's really good actually spends the time, analyzes the reports that they have available to them, and the other one doesn't? You know, it's the sort of things that you can pull from this. I want to know how many times the report is being used, and in particular, is there any performance issues in these reports? You know, if you have a report and it's not being used, is that because people don't like the report, or because it takes 2 minutes to run? You know, this is 2 minutes of someone's very valuable time. You can't have that sort of delay. And I wanted to know what people are doing with the data. Are they literally running this report, dumping it in Excel, mashing a load of stuff together? If they're doing that, it doesn't need to be an SSRS. I mean, we can have something scheduled to actually push the data out to them, ease the process that they're doing. And for me, being a BI developer, I would want to see this all in a visual way. So I want to be able to just look at this and just absorb it all at once, whilst everything's happening in my SSRS environment. Okay, so now that we've covered what we want, we need to actually think about what metrics are captured in the SSRS database. So loads is captured. We're very lucky in this sense. A lot is captured. So SSRS will capture everything at the grain of the report execution. So you go away to your report server, you run a report, and it's going to log out when you run that report, who ran it, and that sort of stuff. So we'll be able to see which reports are being viewed, how often, and by who. Now that's really important. We can see in what format they're being issued, so whether it's as a report, as a PDF, if it's going out as HTML. You know, we can see what people are doing with this data. We can see how it was produced, so whether it was produced by a user going into Report Manager, clicking on that link, was it produced by a schedule that they've got set up, you know, or by some other means. We can see which parameters are used. Now this is also another one for performance tuning. You're looking at a report, it's taking 50 seconds to run, the next day it takes 1 second to run. Why is there such a difference? You know, does it come down to the fact that it's just a bad report and there's load on the server or something at that time? Or it could be that somebody's running a report, you know, from the start of time up until today, and the other person's running it just for 1 day. And again, it depends on how people are using it, but by being able to see what parameters they're using, you can see sort of like see the trends in their usage, and understand how your reports are actually being used by your users. And we can have a look and say how long each report is taken to produce. And we'll go into a bit more on this because there's some really interesting stuff that comes out of that. So each of these, you know, pretty much mirrors up to what we're looking for: are who, what, when, how, and how many, the things that we're looking for. Okay, I'll give you a bit of a warning. There's a lot of content on this slide, but it's really important stuff, so we'll just get straight into it. So when you install Report Server, you're not just installing the Report Manager GUI, you're installing a whole load of stuff. There's a lot of things that get installed. In particular, there are 3 main areas that you want to look at. So you'll have your Report Server database. Now the Report Server database captures everything. It captures all of your executions for a preset amount of time. By default, that preset amount of time is 60 days. you can actually alter it, and there's some scripts on my blog that you can use to alter that. It's a configuration option held in a configuration table, actually in the report server. So you can just do a quick little update script, and you can extend the period of time. If you're thinking about monitoring over a longer period, and you've got the resources to enable you to do that, then just do it. You know, it allows you to have a lot more data to play with. Go for it. The report server also holds subscriptions, schedules, snapshots, and a whole host of stuff to do with security. It holds loads of stuff, and again, it depends on how you want to monitor it and what you want to do with the data, to whether or not you want to look at all of it. So alongside your report server database, you also get a report server _tempdb database. Now, it's probably good to mention here that this isn't the same as SQL Server tempdb. Report server will still use tempdb. What you're looking at with the report server database is that it's used for when you cache reports, when you've got working tables, so when you've snapshotted your data, and it holds the execution stats for reports which are currently running. So whereas the report server records the execution time and that sort of stuff for reports which have run, this records the ones that are running at the moment. And there's also log files. I mean, there's a couple of log files that get produced. There's actually 4. I'm only going to talk about 3 of them. So again, I think just to mention that these are in no way similar to SQL Server transaction logs. These are application logs, these little Windows service logs. So you've got the report server service, bit of a mouthful, but and this records report server threads and errors. So when you run a report in a report server and it gets logged, the report server will only log successful reports. If your report fails for something like a data set is missing or it can't connect, it's not going to log that. That's going to get written out to this report server service log. So if you actually want to know if you're having errors, you're going to have to go away and read this log. You've got the report server web app, which is people going through and what they're doing in your report server. And then you've got the report server log, which is a web service log. So if you're using web services to trigger your reports, then that's where that's going to be. Now, the typical location for all this sort of stuff is in your program files, and then SQL Server, your version, your instance name, and then reporting services, and you'll get a breakdown of them all in there. Yeah, so I said these 3 things are really important, but the bulk of the time that we're going to be spending today, we're going to be looking at the report server DB, because this holds pretty much all of the interesting stuff that we want. Okay, alright, let's get stuck into a bit of SSRS architecture. So when you install SSRS, you get all that stuff, and you get the report server database. Now, if you go into the report server database and you want to start querying what's happening, it's a minefield. There's so much in there. It can be really confusing. Someone's actually gone away and mapped out the whole report server database, and they've stuck up a nice entity relationship diagram. If you go to that link, you can download a PDF of it. It's quite helpful, especially when you're starting out looking at this stuff. Yeah, go and have a look, have a playthrough. One thing it doesn't do is it doesn't show you how this stuff relates to the execution log, but I'll cover off how that works so you have that there. Okay, so the report server. There is lots in here. I mean, there are 35 tables. Some of them are going to be irrelevant depending on how you use SSRS. If you never cache reports, if you never use subscriptions and that sort of stuff, then there's no need to start looking into those tables. For the bulk of this presentation, though, we're going to be looking at 2 main tables. We're going to be looking at the catalogue. Now, the catalogue holds all the items within SSRS. So this holds your folders, your reports, your shared data sources, and your shared data sets. Now, the reason I make a distinction between shared data sets is because there are two other tables called datasets and data sources. Now they hold your embedded shared datasets and your embedded shared data sources. So there's a bit of a difference there between what's being held. The rest of the tables that are on there are to do with security. We won't go into those today, but you can download the scripts and have a look yourself. So we'll have a quick look at these two tables. So catalog, as I said, holds all the items in your report server. I mean, there's tons of stuff in here. One thing that you really need to be aware of is lots of the columns in the SSRS database are integer values. They don't map out what they actually mean. So if you take, for example, type's an integer value, it will be stored just as 1, 2, 3, I think all the way to 8. Now each one of those meaning something different. If you don't know what it means, it's quite difficult to work with this. So 1's a folder, for example, and 2's a report. What you also have in here is some stuff that's particularly interesting. You have the path to how it's stored. So this is the location from your root. So if you move your report server, your links will still work because it's just the root section of it. You got the name of the report. You got the parent ID. So the way that the catalog works is a parent-child hierarchy. So you have a folder. That folder might have a child folder within it, which might have some reports within inside it. You've got whether it's hidden or not, who it was created by, which parameters it can use, and policy ID for security. Then you also have this column, content. Now content is a var binary. What you can do though with that var binary is if you convert that var binary back into a variable character, you can actually pluck your published RDL file straight out of your report server, stick it back into Visual Studio. You've got your report back. It's a fantastic little thing. Yep, okay, so now the execution log storage. Now this table holds all the execution logs for your report server. So every time you run a report, this is where it's stored. Now this holds the report ID. So this is where you need a map for report server because the naming conventions are poor. So report ID here actually relates to item ID in catalog. It's just some bad naming by Microsoft on there. You've got the username, so the username of who is accessing the report. Now again, there's a caveat here because the users that you have in here might not necessarily match up to the users that you have in your user table in the report server. Now that's because the report server allows you to access reports via a user or via a group, via an AD group. So your AD group might have 500 people in. Each one of those can access the report. This is something to be aware of. You've got the format of the report stored in there, which parameters were used, how the report was accessed, and then some stuff around when the report was started and when it was finished. Then you get 3 columns. Now these columns are particularly interesting. So the time of data retrieval, the time of processing, and the time for rendering. So if you've got a report and it's running slowly, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've written some bad T-SQL for that report. There's so much more that goes on in SSRS which could cause your report to be slow. So you've got the time for data retrieval. Now this is the time that the query engine is running, is actually producing your query. Then you have the time of processing. Now the time of processing is if you've got a report, it's got tons and tons of subtotals and totals, you're doing aggregations, you're looking at your mins, your maxes and your sums, that sort of stuff. That stuff takes time to calculate. So that's your processing time, and then your time rendering. It's a lot faster for SSRS to render something as a report than it is to render it as HTML or XML, where it's having to add in all the additional data about it. So that rendering time can be, sometimes 90% of the time it's taking your report to run. And you've got stuff about the source, whether it's being cached or not, the status. Now, the status is a tricky one. because it will only ever report RS success. All your reports are working, brilliant, apart from the ones that aren't working, and those ones are stored in your log files. And also there's some additional information in there, so some useful stuff around pagination. Right, so let's get in to start looking at how we can go about analysing this. So technically, you could analyse your report server just by looking at those two tables. You could look at your catalogue, you could join it to your execution log storage, and start pulling out who's using which report. But Microsoft have tried to simplify this a little bit for you. So they've gone away and they've actually added a couple of views to the report server environment, so you can do this stuff yourself. So in 2005 they started off with the execution log. In 2008, I believe, execution log 2 came along. It was execution log with a couple of more columns. And then since 2008 R2, we've had execution log 3. And again, it is very similar, but they've just added a few more bits to it. What's good about it is that they're all the missing enum tables and stuff, so where you just had an integer value, Microsoft have mapped those out. And it is pretty good. Okay, so let's get in and we'll actually go and have a brief look at the sort of stuff that we have there. Right, so this is my report environment here. I've got a couple of other databases on here. But at the time that I installed Report Server, it would have installed the Report Server database and the Report Server temp.db. So those are the two that we were talking about. Okay. So yeah, so I'm just going to run a couple of queries and actually have a look at what's going on here. So I'm actually doing what Microsoft don't want me to do. I'm going away and I'm querying the report server live. So what we can do is just quick select staff from catalog and actually have a look. One thing I should show you is our report server environment that we're looking at. So the report server environment, this is just a demo one I've set up. It's got 5 folders in it. These folders have got their own reports in them, and a couple of dummy reports. These reports are all just a very basic select from an AdventureWorks table. I've actually gone away and downloaded a couple of the AdventureWorks sample reports. You've got another folder, nothing exciting here, it's just an empty folder. You have the SSRSDB monitoring reports, which we'll be looking at a little bit later. And we also have a data sources folder which holds 2 data sources. So nothing, too complicated in there. But what you can see is when I run report catalog, is the report catalog mirrors that. So we've got a folder node here of inception reports, and underneath each one of those you can see that there are 5 reports. So you've got your parent there and your children there, and the same thing again here: parent, children, parent, parent. And each one of these has their own ID. So you can see here that the Inception's report ID is that, and that's the same for all of these here. Yeah. Okay, so now if I have a quick look at the execution log, just so you're aware, I've got a couple of subscriptions set up on here, so while we're going through the demos, the data in here might be changing because I've got a subscription running every minute, one running every 2 minutes, and one running every 5 minutes, all just for the same report, just to simulate some usage in the report server. So if we have a look at this, so you can see, so far today, in the last 6 minutes, it's 9:49 here at the moment, we've had 10 executions. But the problem that you have is, what are these executions? What's request type 1? What's report action 1? We've got the format. That's pretty helpful. So you can see here that one's being run out as XML, CSV there, PDF, HTML. There's quite a lot of stuff going on there. This is your data retrieval stuff, so what I was talking about. So your data retrievals, this is what the engine is doing. This is any calculations within the report, and this is the time of rendering. I mean, look at some of these. These are in milliseconds, but I mean, these are still long waits. And again, the RS success column. All of these are working. Woohoo! Okay. Yeah, so what I was saying before about how by default your execution history is kept for 60 days. It's this configuration value that you'd want to change if you want to extend that period. You can just write an update statement to do that. So, I mean, just looking at this is great, but we don't know which report. Report ID, I mean, what is that report? Which reports are actually running here? You can see here that there are 2 separate reports being run. So we can actually instead go along and run the execution log 3. And the execution log 3 will show us that, right, these are all inception 1 and that one is inception 3. We can see who ran the report. So they're all being run by me. A unique ID for that report. As I said, these are all running on a subscription, so the request type's a subscription. And we can see again everything else about it. If we do a quick comparison, you can see, how the execution log 3, is that much better than just running the execution log. So your request types and stuff get mapped out. Here, one's a subscription, report action, one's a render. That's interesting stuff. If we actually have a look at the definition of that report, of that view, sorry, we can see how Microsoft have actually mapped out all of these columns if we want to do something, if we want to write something ourselves. So we can see up here, this is our request type, and we've got down here our report action, and our sources and stuff. I mean, it's not tricky stuff to actually map out. And I mean, depending on what you want to do with monitoring SSRS, this is your quick and dirty way. I mean, you've got access now, to go away and just start looking at how it's being used. Okay, admittedly, it's not the best way. There's not a great deal of detail there. But there's quite a lot. So let's go back to our slides. Okay, so as I said, I mean, there are lots of pros and there are some cons to using this method. So your pros are that it uses monitoring out of the box. At the end of the day, if you've got a report server, you've got access to all of these tools. Without a great deal of knowledge, you can start having a look at what's happening. It covers off lots of our who, when, how many, and what we're looking at. And it's supported by Microsoft. This is what they would like you to do. But for me, the cons are that it's just too basic. There's no history, and it's very manual. Yeah, you could schedule it yourself. You could write a report based on top of the execution log view if you wanted. You could do sort of stuff like that. But it does work for if you just want a fast and dirty way. If you want to know more about your reports and more about what they contain, then you might want to look at our method number 2. Now, method number 2 is a set of queries by a great guy called Brett Stratham from the States, I believe. And he wrote a series of queries which will enable you to analyze your reports in much more detail, in crazy detail. Sorry to skip on. That link there will link you to the CodePlex site, so you can go and download all of his scripts. Okay. So his scripts contain two things. Number one is an SSIS package that will allow you to point it at your report server, and it will loop over all your files and all your folders, and it will create a directory somewhere if you want it, and it will extract all of the RDLs from your report server in the file structure. If you're starting a new job and you want to get source control up or something on those reports, and it isn't currently, and you need all of those reports, this is a great way to do it. You can just rip all the reports straight out of them, stick them in source control, and you're away. And then the second part is the report queries. Now, what I was saying before about in the catalog table, you have a content table which you can convert back into var binary, from var binary into XML, into a variable character, and actually have a look at the content of it. Now that's all stored. RDLs are an XML type language. So what you can start doing by analyzing that and by using XPath and XQuery is you can start pulling out gems of information from the RDL, because the RDL contains all the columns that you're using, all the data sources you're using, which T-SQL. So what Brett's done is he's actually written some queries that do all of that. So you can extract your RDLs, your T-SQL. You can see which columns are used in a report. You can see which data sets are used in a report. You can see which columns aren't used in a report. So where somebody's written maybe a select star, and there are 40 columns going into this report and only 2 being output, that's a waste of processing time. Okay, so let's go and have a excuse me, a quick look at this. Right, let's run up demo number 2. So we'll go away and we'll have a quick look at where we can get this stuff from. So I'm just running up a link to his Coplex site. And this is the Coplex site. You can click over here, source control, go and download all the scripts, and then just start playing with them really. There's quite a bit of documentation about them on his blog, and they are very good. With this though, these queries are expensive. So warning, they are very expensive. If you're going to run them, don't run them on your production server when people are using your report server. It's going to cripple it. I'm not kidding. To go through and shred XML, it's quite processor intensive. And to go through and shred the amount of XML that's produced by a complicated report, it takes time. It really does. So you'll want to be creating a backup of your server to run this stuff on. When you download Brett's scripts, he'll get you to spin up a new database to store them in. So what I've got here is a report queries database. And we've got a catalog content view. So this view is basically it's just doing the conversion for you and storing it as a view. So what we can see here is these are all of my reports and my data sources. If I scroll along a bit, I can see the content as a var binary. I can see the content as a converted to a variable character or as XML. Now this is where you can do some cool stuff. So if I just copy this and I paste it into a new window, this is the XML. You can see it is 600 lines of XML for something that is relatively simple. But if I copy this again and I head over to my Visual Studio, I'm going to add a new item here. I'm going to add a report. I'm just going to call it example. Let's add that. Now if I right click, view code, the code will look familiar to the opening of what we just had. I can just delete that, paste over, close that window. Hey presto, by magic we've got the RDL back. that is powerful. You delete an RDL, you don't need to go down and download it off the report server. You can literally just pull it straight out of there. That's very cool. Okay, so let's have a look at a couple of other things that he has. So what we can do here is, this one is query number 4, and it extracts connections, and it extracts the T-SQL for each of those connections. So these aren't your shared ones that you'd be able to see in your report folder on Report Manager. These are ones that are actually inside your reports. So these are derived by, you can see here, there's some shredding of XML going on. We're looking at we're looking for shared data set there, shared data set text, apologies there, and the command type text and stuff. So command text is your SQL, and then what Brett's doing there is he's doing a cross apply with an XML.node to actually split these all out onto separate columns, separate rows, sorry. So we can see here now that in our Inception report 1, there's a dataset called dataset1. It's good naming conventions by me there. You can pull the XML content for that report. We've got a text type command here as text, so it's SQL text. And we have the command text. So again, I can have a look at this report. How's it running? Is it running slowly? It's running slowly because data's taking a long time. So I can go away, use AdventureWorks. I can paste that in, and I can run it. I can stick an execution plan on there. We can actually start analysing what's going on in this query. We can improve it, we can tune it, we can get it running faster. And I mean, this is the stuff, that these are the sorts of things that you can do really well in his scripts. So again, it really depends on how you want to use your report server, but the pros for this one are that far more is recorded, it's extendable and free, and covers a lot of what is missing about reports. Now the cons, and there's a big con, it's only about reports. It doesn't include anything about executions. So technically, you're not able to actually monitor your executions with this version alone. You could combine this with the execution log 3, and you've got quite a robust solution there. But again, there are a few things that it's not doing. So there's no history, it's not visual, it's still manual. It doesn't capture executions, as I've said, and as I've given you the warning already, you have been warned. These are expensive queries. These are really expensive. They are going to cripple your server. Okay, so as I said, you can combine the two, but is that really enough? Does that really do what you want? For me it doesn't. So what's missing? I think there's quite a lot missing, really. So for me, the stuff that's sort of missing is, I'm a very visual person. I like to be able to consume all my data in a very visual way. I don't want to have to be running this stuff. So, a visual essence is missing. Usage reports. I want to be able to go away into my report environment, run a report, see who's using a report, see who's not using a report, and then pass that on to my senior leadership team so they can go away and actually address that with the staff. Now, if it's manual, I know me. If it's manual, I've got other things to do. Unless it's automated, I'm never going to look at this stuff. If it's not running for me, I can just click one thing and it's there. I'm not going to do it. People's time is precious, so automation is the key. The other two things, they're not automated. I really need automated. History tracking. Have you ever been in this sort of situation? Someone phones you up, they say, hi, you're trying to run this report. I can't get into it. And I'm like, okay, you know, have you been able to access this report? Yeah, I've always had access to the report. How on earth do you prove that? It could be an AD change. You could go back and see who was in the AD group potentially. But again, that's another step of the process. You can't just maybe give this person permissions to run this report if they've never had it. So by recording history, you know, we can capture these sorts of things. We can also capture changes in the reports. So if you make a change to a report and you publish it, a week later somebody runs the report and it's doing something completely different to what they expect it to, you can just, you know, pull the previous report straight out the back of about what we're going to talk about in a second. And performance monitoring. I need to know if what's running is performing well. Sure, we can see it through the execution log views. We can see the amount of time that it's taking. It's in milliseconds, we have to do a bit of conversion on top of it and stuff. But again, if I can see performance metrics in a visual way, in a one-stop shop, you know, that's what I personally want. Okay, so now we're on to our third method, the SSRSDB, or the create your own method. You don't want to use this method, you don't have to. You can just use bits and bobs of it and create something of your own. So what is this method doing differently to what the two are currently? So what the SSRSDB does, and for each of these there's a blog post on my blog, and there'll be the link again at the end. You can go away and pull that stuff. But the SSRSDB is essentially a data warehouse. It's a Kimball style data warehouse where everything's being captured on whatever period you want it to be captured on. It has additional metadata about your reports, so you're quite limited on what you can actually store in SSRS. You can store the report title and a brief description about it, but you can't store who owns the report, who requested it, maybe some additional stuff about it. It's also an ETL process to load that data warehouse. It's a set of usage reports, so you can just run a report to see what's happening. And these usage reports are in SSRS, so they're in an environment that's familiar to your users who are already working with SSRS. Then we've also got an automated process to notify our users of unused reports. So you might have been working on this all singing, all dancing new dashboard. It encompasses 6 reports that you had already. It's brilliant. Now you go away to the business, you say, look, work's been done. It's great. People love it. We've got these 6 reports. You know, they're cluttering up our environment. Can I get rid of them? And they go, well, we might still need those reports. And I'm like, you don't need them. You've got the dashboard. They're like, no, we might still need those reports. So how can you prove to the business? So what we can do is we have a process to notify the users that, you know, your report isn't being used. And that's all customizable per report in the metadata. Then we have another process to, when they ignore that process, to automatically do something with those reports, to remove them in some way. And there's also some additional things that this process does, which again you can read about on the blog. It's a bit beyond the amount of time that we have left today, but you have theme management and you have source control. It's not source control, you know, in the conventional sense, but it's like a backup source control. So you can go away and read about that, or come and see me afterwards. I'm happy to discuss it. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the warehouse that it creates. So say it's not a very complicated warehouse. You know, it's your simple Kimball style schema, dimensions and facts, and you've got your type 2 slowly changing dimensions. So for those who don't know, every time you make a change to something in it, a new row is written out. So we keep all the history of it. Alright, okay, let's go and have a quick look at some of this stuff. Right, okay. Okay, so the database, once you run the load scripts, so you can download all of these scripts from my blog and get started with them. The build script will build you a very basic data warehouse. Looks like this. You have got your dimensions, you've got facts, a staging area, and a set of support items. Now these are your metadata items, your log files, styles, configuration, these sorts of things that are useful. So stuff that technically isn't, standard in a warehouse, but we need it for this. Okay, so the process essentially is this stuff. To load the report server, I want a minimal amount of impact on my production server. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a backup of our production server, we're going to restore it, and we're going to use that. So you might have seen when we were looking at the report server earlier, in between the report server and the temp DB, was this little guy, report server clone. Now, the report server clone database is essentially just a mirror copy. I'm just taking a backup of my report server and I'm restoring it with a different name so that I can report from it. Now, this is only one option that you have. You could use something else. You could use some form of high availability. You could use mirroring. Yes, that's entirely up to you. For my purposes, the report server, it doesn't have for this one in particular, for my demo, it doesn't have a great deal of data in it. I have the luxury of being able to back up and restore very fast. So that's the process that I've gone for. With this, we have the ETL phase, and the ETL layer looks something like this. So what you have up here are a load of variables. They're loaded in from your configuration table. We are loading our dimensions. They all load in a very similar fashion. As I said, these are type 2, so they change in dimensions, so they're handled in that way. You have a staging environment. Data comes into the staging environment. It's compared to to the data that we currently have. New rows are inserted, old rows are updated, that sort of stuff. That's all done using a T-SQL merge. You'll notice here though that there are less dimensions than there are in the actual database. So we're only loading 5, whereas over here we've got something like 1, 2, 3, lots more than 5. Now that's because the report server environment, a lot of the dimensions and a lot of the tables are static, so types aren't going to really change. So there's no point in loading them every single day and looking for changes, because I know what all the values are going to be up front. So yeah, so dimensions are loaded. Then we load our fact tables. Of 3 fact tables, essentially they're used for monitoring executions, monitoring security, and monitoring what data is used in your reports. So you've got a transactional fact and factless facts. Please go away and read about Kimball or ask me afterwards for the difference. And essentially I'm just using a lookup design pattern to load in this data. So as we're moving through, we have our query, and we look up what the item is key, the format and stuff. As we go through, we build up our query. And then we move down to our last 2 phases. The one on the right here that uses log files. A little note here to say that success is forced on this one, so it will always succeed regardless of whether or not it fails. And that's because it will attempt to read the log file that is currently in use, and it would fail because it wouldn't be able to read it. So on the left side here we have our metadata. Now what this process does is, if you're spinning this up on a brand new report server, or your current report server rather, you might have 150 reports. Now you don't want to go through updating the metadata for all of those reports yourself. This report name, it would be laborious. So what it will do is it will load your data warehouse, it will take the report titles, it will push it over into an Excel file, which looks like the one I'm going to show you in a moment. You can then update that, add in anything that you want, run this process again, and it will suck that data up. And if there's any new reports, it will push that data in. So essentially, it sucks data up, updates the database, pushes the data back out. So you've always got an up-to-date version of it. You make changes in either place, and they both update. So the report metadata looks like this. You have got an item version, when the item name. When the report was requested, it's going to be different to what's held in the report server. The report style, this is based on if you're using themes. Again, you can read about that on my blog. What type of item it is, whether it's a main report or a sub-report, because if somebody's not using a sub-report, it's not as important for me anyway. I want to know if they're using the main report. They have to get to they go through the main report to get to the sub-reports. So I'm only really want them onto main reports. Who owns the item, an email address for them, an inactive period. So it's the period of days a report can be not used for before we'll do something with it. After that period, what happens? So these are all set to email, so we're going to trigger an email to go to that person. A final period. So how long can go after the first one has been triggered before we can do something with it, and then what we want to do. So after 20 days, if Inception 1 has not been used, it will be automatically hidden. Okay. Right, let's take a look at our end result of what we're trying to achieve here. So what we have are two reports. This one which should be hidden, and this one here. So this is our report catalog. So what this report does is it will show us for our entire report environment what is happening in a trend way, a list of our reports and how they're being used. So what we can see here, once it loads, we'll see on the left we've got a list of high-level report statistics. So how many times our reports have been used, by how many users, how many distinct users, and on the right side we'll see a trend history. So what this will do will work out an average per day of how often your reports are being used throughout the day. So what you have here, now this data is all dummy data. What you'll more than likely see is hopefully a spike in the morning, followed by a bit of a trail off throughout the day. So what you can see here is so far this month I have run my reports on my dev box 1,000 times. I haven't personally done that. I've got a whole load of subscriptions running, but you know, you get the gist. Yesterday I ran 327, an average per day. How many of our reports are being used, and that's our trend. So what we have down here is our report catalog. We can see Inception 1 report. Today it's been run 269 times. How many times been run to month to date, and so on and so on. And then we get our day since last contact. This report was last run yesterday. It wasn't actually last run yesterday. This process hasn't been run today. It has been running today. This is actually still looking at yesterday's stats. Then we have a couple of reports, and they've also not been run. I'm just going to go ahead and get this up to date. 1 second. So I'm going to go into my jobs. I've got a job here for SSRSDB load. This is going to do the backup. So it's going to take a backup of our production server, restore it to our report server clone, and then the ETL phase is going to load all of that data in, and so we can start analyzing it. It should only take about 10 seconds to run this. As say, the amount of data that's in there is very small, so it's actually finished running already. Hopefully this will refresh a little bit faster than it did a moment ago, and we'll be able to see some updates. There we go. Okay, so we've had more, as I say, these things are running. We've had 500 executions today of our reports, and we can see day since last run is 0. Each one of these arrays will take you through to the report, so you can actually just use this to launch your reports if you wish. what we can do is we can actually start going in now and we can drill into some of these reports and have a look at how they're actually being used. Now the sort of stuff that I want to monitor, as I say, are things like performance tuning and how the report's being used. So up here at the top we've got a chart which maps out the amount of time spent on the last 50 executions. This one over here is the last one that ran, how it's running, and a breakdown of how it's being executed in render, report and query. So queries, the amount of time it's going to the engine, report doing calculations in the report, render actually taking the making the XML or the HTML or however you've got it configured. So what you can see here is this report is taking a long time to render. It's taking a really long time to render. What we have below here, just on that, rendering is really hard to tune. You pretty much just don't want to render it out as these types. It's difficult to tune that. Maybe you want to remove some of the complexity, remove some of the colorings, make it a bit more basic so it doesn't have to go through and do all of that process. So, report details is coming from the metadata. So, its name, Inception 1, who owns it, which version it is, when it was created, whether it's visible or not, and our inactive period and what's going to happen. We then have a report log down here, so we can see who's been using the report, how they're using it, the total amount of bytes that it's using, which is a lot there. But this is spitting out PDFs and very large. I mean, the table that it's chucking out must have 50,000 records in it, and it's being written out every minute and stuff. So you know, this is very fast. You've got the item parameters. So if this report was running parameters, what are those parameters? The amount of time it's taking to run in seconds. You know, you've got some really interesting stuff that you can start seeing about your environment. Then we can start looking into which fields are being used in this report. So I can come in here and just see which fields are being used. Because this maps out every single day, if somebody had deleted a field yesterday, it would appear in here as deleted. So somebody phones up and says, hey, I've run this report, it's looking crazy, stuff's missing. I can quickly spin up this, have a look and go, somebody's actually removed that from that column. You'll need to speak to someone to get it fixed, or I can just go back in and add that column in for you. Or you might look up here and the query section is much larger. Whatever query you're using is really crippling this report. So I could go download the RDL, run it up, take the T-SQL out, stick it in Management Studio and tune it. Or I could just expand my T-SQL/MDX node here and take the T-SQL straight out of it, tune it, then do the process if it needs to be tuned. So this is some, you know, hopefully interesting stuff that really starts to build up a picture of your environment. But what do we do about these ones where people aren't viewing them? So we know, let's just have a look at company sales. So this report, the metadata is set that after 3 days it's set to expire. Some of these reports are set differently. So now we want to email our users to say, hey, you're not using the report. So what we have is we have two jobs here, unused notify and unused cleanup. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run unused notify. Now unused notify is a cursor. It's going to loop over a query. It's going to send some emails and say, hey, you're not using that report. So I have got my emails up over here. I'm just going to send and receive and grab those emails. Okay, so what we have is we have this email, so HTML just gets sent out, and what you have is a call to action to your staff. Your report is due for deprecation. Act now. If you don't act, your report is going to go. So it's got a bit of stuff in here. Inception 4 has not been used for more than so many days. This report is now due for deprecation. It's going to be removed today. If you don't want this to happen, click this link. Now that link is a link back to your report environment. If they click that link, it's going to trigger an execution. So when this process gets a rerun, they're not going to have to, it'll basically reset their counter. This one over here says you need to act now. It's not been used for more than 4 days, but it won't be removed for 3 days. And that's, again, it's all based on the metadata. It's entirely configurable. Okay, but time goes by. They're still not doing anything with it. And I want rid of those reports. I want rid of Inception Report 4. So now I'm going to run the cleanup. Before I do that, I'm just going to go over to my Inception folder, and just show you that 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 still exist. I'm going to run the cleanup script. This is very similar again. It's a cursor, loops over the data, picks out the ones that need to be removed. If I go back to the report server, I refresh, Inception 4 and 5 have gone. Presumably not all of my emails came through then to show me that Inception 5 was also due for deprecation. Oh well. So now we have a process that's automated, that we can see how our reports are working. We've got a job to trigger whether or not they are being used, and we can prove to the business that their reports are no longer required, and we can clear them up. So you've just got there a couple of pictures of a bit more of an indicative process there of trend time, and the pros and the cons. Okay, so as I say, this really depends on what you want to do. If you're looking for a quick and dirty solution, then just using the execution log will do it. If you want to know more about your reports as a DBA, then you can use a combination of the Coplex queries and the execution log. If you need that fully automated environment, go straight for your SSRSDB. It covers all of the who, what, when, where, how. A wider variety of data is captured. Trends, usage history is all held in SSRS. Lots goes on. Cons: it requires a backup and restore or some other high availability option. If you have any questions, please drop me an email. My email and stuff will be below this video. If you want to grab the scripts, please do. There's a link there to the scripts. Thank you very much for viewing, and hopefully see you soon. Alright, thank you.